Okay, our next thing to look at is the Education Act and how that could be used. This is quite a simple one, really. There's two ways of looking at this. The first is that many people believe that this was a much, much fairer system than what came before. And I don't think a lot of people could argue with that. I mean, if you were, especially for poor people. So if you were a poor person before the war, before the Education Act, what would have happened is that you would have gone to school, to one school, an elementary school it was called, okay, where years 5 to 14, and you would have left school at 14 and then you would have entered into the world of work. So if you were poor, no matter how clever you were, how well you did in school, you left at 14 and you went and got a job. Now that meant that university just wasn't open to clever people that were poor. So before the 40s and the Education Act, no way if you were poor that you were ever going to university. Doesn't happen. Or that you're having education past 14 because your family can't afford it. So the idea is the Education Act suddenly starts making things a lot fairer. And I think overall that's got to be our big picture of this. The downside though, the big downside is that this isn't a perfect system. And the big criticism of the Education Act is that pupils and people have to take a test at age 11. Now, if you're a late bloomer, okay, or if you perhaps just having a bad day in that test, you know, it can all happen to everyone, then your whole future is based on that. So if you don't pass very well, or even if you fail it, I mean, that could just be a bad day, couldn't it? It could be that you're feeling unwell, it could be loads of reasons. But you can't retake it, and it dictates the rest of your life. So how clever you are at 11 dictates really the prospects of your whole life. That's probably not a great thing. So that's the big criticism of the Education Act. Now, home for all policy, generally seen as a good thing. We've got things, you know, that Labour did offer some housing. They ended up building 1.2 million homes, which was way more than was expected, but they met the needs of the people. They also started introducing council housing. So they didn't just build these temporary homes, they built council houses a lot of the time. Council houses are still around today and were generally deemed to be very successful things. The introduction of council estates, although we know that, you know, what's happened is that instead of everyone living in council estates, what's happened is poorer people tend to. But nonetheless, generally seem to be a very good thing. So the only things that I think we can criticise Labour for on the Homes for All policy is that people sometimes lived in some of the prefab homes, these temporary homes, for too long, and the cost was a lot again. So Labour spent too much money on this. But on the whole, people still think that these things are good. When we look at nationalisation, people are very, in today's world, very opposed to nationalisation. However, the nationalisation of industries under the Labour government on the whole was clearly a really good thing, and really most people see it as really good government intervention. I certainly do. I think most historians do as well. So things like it clearly saves the coal industry. Okay, the coal industry would have done badly without government investment, and they turned that around and made it quite a successful industry. So that was a really good thing. Found that you know, a lot of people worked in these nationalised industries. It provided huge number of jobs. 1 in 2 people ended up working in them. So it helped to solve unemployment. Contributes hugely to the economy. So 20% of the overall economy becomes from nationalised industries. So some coal, transport, electricity, steel gets nationalised in 1951. So it contributes really, really well to the economy. And also, if you lived in really rural areas, if you lived in the countryside, all of a sudden someone's coming around to your house offering you electricity. You know, very difficult for you to think now, isn't it, that anyone could possibly live without electricity? But most, you know, a lot of people did when in the countryside in 1945. However, under the national grid that Labour introduced, people had access to electricity for the first time. So it was a really big success. A lot of people think this was a really good thing. Any negatives to nationalisation? Yes, there's a few. There's an argument, isn't there, that nationalisation saves industries at the cost of the working person, at the taxpayer's expense. So all the money that Labour invested into things like the coal mines or into transport, and we're talking billions and billions of pounds, people could argue, well, that those billions of pounds could have been better spent on other things. There's also an argument to say that when you nationalise things, so when you nationalise things like transport, they don't benefit in the long run, because eventually your services become inefficient. Now, the reason that happens is because if, say, for example, you've only got one train company that runs all the trains in the country, they will just, people will become a bit lazy because there's no competition from another company. So standards drop is the argument here. Okay, so there's an argument to say that one or two arguments to say it was a negative, but on the whole, historians look back on nationalisation, deem it to be a really, really well-timed, productive, good thing that really benefited the country.